5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Puck short.
Hello everyone and welcome to a brand new episode of the One Puck Short podcast. It is Wednesday the 17th of February 2016 and as always I am your host Rob McGregor. Cat Silverman of today's Slapshot, In Goal Magazine and the Arizona Coyotes is joining me on today's show to talk about the events of the last 10 days. Unfortunately I missed last week's episode due to illness, so apologies to those of you who have missed me, but hopefully Cat and I can fill that hole in your life over the next 45 minutes. One Puck Short is brought to you in association with Eastside Hockey Manager, an in-depth ice hockey management simulation brought to you by Sports Interactive and Sega, developers of the world-famous Football Manager series, available now for PC via Steam. Joining me now on the One Puck Short podcast, part of the hockey development team for the Arizona Coyotes, writer for various outlets, including In Goal Magazine and today's Slapshot. Please welcome to the show, Cat Silverman. Hi, Cat. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great. Thank you very much for joining me today. There's a few bits to catch up with, most notably the Toronto Maple Leafs traded their captain to Ottawa, a previously unheard of sentence, but everybody seems to love the idea that Phaneuf is out of Toronto. Interesting move. I don't quite get this one from the Senators' point of view. What did you make of the deal?
From the Senators' point of view, they kind of they picked up an albatross contract in Dion Phaneuf. But they shed some dead weight that they just couldn't figure out how to shed, most notably Jared Cohen.
Yeah.
And that, for me, was, I think, if Toronto hadn't been willing to pick up Jared Cohen, I don't think they would have done the deal. And, I mean, Dion Phaneuf he's a veteran defenseman. He's got offensive ability. Depending on who you talk to, he's either slightly underrated because his contract is so bad, or he's immensely overrated just because he got a contract that big. And it depends. But it's not the best move from the Senators' standpoint. It's a great move from Toronto's standpoint, assuming they buy out Jared Cohen. If they don't, that's when the trade might start looking a little bit more even. I know that Ottawa's got an internal budget, so they're a team that can't really buy out players.
Yeah.
With the ease that Toronto can. They can't just have dead weight sitting around, which is basically what Jared Cohen is, whether he's bought out or not. So that's really the only justification I can see from their standpoint. I know they wanted to improve their blue line. Maybe they figured they couldn't get anything better throughout the season, but I don't know.
Yeah, it was a strange one. I think you've probably hit the crux of it in a sense. From Ottawa's point of view, they've got a guy in Phaneuf who's generally pretty healthy. He doesn't miss a lot of time with injury, whereas they've dumped Milan Michalek as well, who's missed a lot of time over the last few years through injury. So, that they are, I don't think it's any secret, as you said, a budget team. So they move Michalek, who's basically just been cashing a paycheck without really playing a significant role for a couple of years now. Callum was the one. A lot of people are pretty down on him. You can understand why, given the way he's played. And I guess from the Leafs' point of view, even if they dangled him out there for like a third or fourth round pick, you wonder if somebody would take a shot on him. So I don't know if they necessarily have to buy him out just for somebody to go, look, guys, we will take literally anything for this guy just to save us having to buy him out. I kind of feel like he's young enough for somebody to go, we'll have a go. We'll have a go on that. So
if Jared Tenorti was only traded for John Scott, I don't know if Jared Cohen can pick up anything. Just because Jared Tenorti's another big, not necessarily puck-moving defenseman, but a big-bodied, physical, former first-round pick defenseman. And he barely commanded anything on the market. The Coyotes got him for dirt cheap.
Yeah.
So,
they moved Stefan Elliott.
He's on an ELC, so I don't know why anybody would pick up Cohen.
Yeah, maybe. What was Cohen? Was he a top 10 pick? I kind of feel like he was pretty high. I can't remember off the top of my head. And
He was unnecessarily high. Which, having him go in the first round in the first place was unnecessarily high, but no, if a team wants to take a flyer on him, he's so expensive.
Yeah, ninth. There we go. 9th overall in 2009.
For what he has, he's so expensive that you'd assume, Brandon Gormley, also a former first-round pick. I think he went relatively high as well, if I
Yeah, he did.
remember correctly. And I mean, the Coyotes barely got anything for him as well. So I don't know if teams are necessarily as trusting of first-round pick defensemen anymore as they used to be.
Yeah.
Gormley went 13th overall in 2010, and he barely got anything. So,
I mean, the common denominator in both the Tinordi deal and Gormley is Stefan Elliott, who just kind of didn't work out in Colorado. He was pretty high as well, Stefan Elliott. I'm sure Elliott was the first.
I think he was a second-round pick.
You know, and he's kind of a guy who didn't work out in Denver. Second round, 49th overall in 2009. So same draft as Cowan. But yeah, it's strange how these young D-men just haven't worked out as projected. I mean, from the Leafs' point of view, they picked up a pretty good prospect in Tobias Lindbergh as well. That seems to be the one that a lot of people are high on. They've got a second-round pick, which, could go either way. But Lindbergh, plus obviously, as we mentioned, kind of the potential cap relief if they move or buy out Cowan. I mean, they end up nearly $2 million better off if they get rid of Cowan. Whereas at the moment, they're a little bit worse off to roughly the same tune, actually, $1.8 million.
Sort of with Cowan, they have half a year left, basically. Yeah. I mean, like a third of a year, to hopefully see if he can potentially be rehabbed in a different environment.
Yeah.
So it's a very low risk move for them picking him up. I mean, he wasn't working out in Ottawa, like that was clear.
Yeah.
But he did go first over, like in the first round for a reason. So if they can even turn him into a third pairing guy.
Yeah.
He costs a little bit too much for it, but they're a team that can afford it, especially at the moment. I mean, they iced a roster that was, $28 million a couple days ago? So they can afford that. They can afford a third pairing guy who costs them way too much for the moment.
Yeah.
Ottawa just could not.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think Cowan's a UFA or maybe an RFA in 2017 anyway. So it's not like they've got a lot of term there to deal with, even if they make him like a third pair guy. Because as you said, they aren't a cap team right now. And they're not going to be for at least a couple of years. So, if you have a competent third-line guy, you take it on the chin for a year and then walk away. But it was just an interesting one, as we said at the top, that I couldn't quite figure it from the Senators' point of view. But as you said, they shed some dead weight. They wanted a guy to play with Cody Ceci on the second pair. How that works out, I know people are kind of like, that might not work so well, but I guess the proof is in the pudding. It just seemed a strange one to me because, as you hinted at, Phaneuf's contract isn't brilliant, shall we say, per se. And the Senators, they're just a team I don't know where they're going. I don't understand their direction. And I just think they're kind of hanging in there on the bubble right now. And I don't know if that's the way for them to go. It just felt like a weird deal from their point of view to me.
You mentioned that they're sort of hanging on the bubble. It may sound kind of funny, but their GM, and I mean funny is not the right word, but it could be looked at as their GM is terminal right now. I mean, he's planning on stepping down soon because he is ill.
Yeah.
So he might not be making drastic moves one way or another, other than, he shed some of the dead weight, picked up a guy who's serviceable, even if he's not, Dion Phaneuf's not a top pairing guy, but he's a serviceable guy. He picks him up, keeps the team, like you said, just sort of hanging in there until a new regime takes over. He's not making irreparable damage. He's not shoving the team way down one road to the point where if a new regime wants to move it in a different direction, they'll have to undo a ton of work. I think he's sort of leaving a skeleton structure, so to speak, for the next regime, which it may be frustrating for the Senators fans now, but I would much rather he do that and then do what guys like Dave Nonis did, where he takes an entire regime, tears it down, builds whatever the hell he was building, and then the next regime has to basically tear it all down again and start from scratch. There's not a whole lot that will need to be undone on the Senators when the new regime takes over.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, actually. I hadn't thought about it that way. As you say, Brian Murray's going to step down in the very near future, by the sounds of it, so with health issues and so forth. But yeah, I'd say it was just one that raised an eyebrow from the Sens side. I think the Leafs have done a great job rebuilding, really, considering, as you said, the sort of situation they're in when Nonis was still there, and getting anything for Clarkson, moving Kessel and Phaneuf, and retaining so little salary. That was the impressive part. But interesting one. Let's move west slightly, because Winnipeg made a pretty big, re-signing in the form of Dustin Byfuglien last week as well. 5 years, $38 million, and an annual cap hit of $7.6 million. I think that's a pretty damn good deal for the Jets, in all honesty.
You think so?
Yeah. How do you replace Dustin Byfuglien? You can't. No one can replace Dustin Byfuglien on that team.
But is he worth... there's a guy that you can't replace, and it's Dustin Byfuglien. But he's not young. And looking at their roster, they don't look like they're going to be able to win anytime soon. You assume that they have one of the best prospect pools in the NHL.
I would say they do, yeah.
But their AHL team is dead last, and it's not close. I mean, they're doing worse than Springfield. Okay. They're doing worse than most of the teams that you would maybe assume to be struggling. I mean, the Coyotes prospect system is mostly still in the major juniors, so their AHL team's a little thin right now. But the AHL team for Winnipeg has guys like Nicholas Petan, it has Chase DeLeo, and they're last. They are dead last. They're not scoring goals. Eric Comrie's doing the best he can, but he can't save it. And then the Winnipeg Jets keep fluctuating somewhere near dead last as well. So they've just given a big chunk of money to someone who plays a very physical style of game.
Yeah.
And you can't replace Dustin Byfuglien right now, but 1 year down the road, even 2 years down the road, you don't know how quickly he is going to regress just because his style of play isn't as sustainable the older you get. So I thought it was a little bit of an overpayment, especially because they did give him term. But
he wanted more term.
It's not the worst deal I've ever seen.
No, I mean, I like that. He wanted more years, and they've given him more dollar. Which I don't, I mean, he's only 30. It's not like...
Is he only 30? I thought he was...
No, he's 30 years old. I think he turns 31 either at the end of this month or next.
I feel like he's been in the NHL since I was a child.
Well, I mean...
He's only 30!
Yeah, this is what I mean. This is why... Gracious. So he personally has maybe one more shot at a big money, short-term deal, when this expires. And he doesn't miss a huge amount of time. Even the way he plays, he's pretty durable, I think, in general terms. And, I mean, as you said, they've got guys like Nick Petan, maybe not in the best situation in the AHL right now, but Ehlers has had a pretty good year this year. They've got Brendan Lemieux in the system as well, Jake Morrissey, and, obviously the goaltending side of things, they're probably set better than anyone with Hutchinson, who's better than his numbers suggest. Hellebuck's had a great run with the Jets this year, and you mentioned Eric Comrie, who's a brilliant prospect for them. So, the age thing factors into him. He'll be, 35, 36 when it ends. And, I can see him still being a useful player for them. He may be slightly overpaid by that point, by that last year, but I like this, because especially when they've got Myers as well, who's, been better there. Enstrom's 31, so, he's a UFA in a couple of years. So, I quite like it. I think, especially if they re-sign Trouba to a reasonable deal, and maybe the Ryan Murray bridge contract is something they look at, because Murray just signed a 2-year extension as well with 2.8 per year. So, I don't hate this for the Jets. I really don't, because I don't know how it's like taking Carlson out of the Senators in a sense, or... I'm trying to think of another guy who's such a big part of the team's defense that, I don't know how they would have filled that hole if they let him walk away, because there's nobody going to trade a guy of equivalent, even if the Islanders had given up Travis Hamonic for Byfuglien. That's not quite a like-for-like trade. I like Hamonic, and he's on a brilliant deal. I don't know. I just thought it was a real strong deal for the Jets, because yes, they paid a little bit more, but they can probably afford to pay a little bit more. It means they probably lose Andrew Ladd, but I just think he's such a big part of that team, and they got him down on the years, because he wanted quite 6 or 7 years, and they got him down to 5.
That's true. I mean, I'm definitely more hesitant in terms of looking at these big deals, just because I'm in the Pacific Division, so I've been watching Ryan Getzlaf this year.
Yeah,
and he's the perfect example of a player who's not one of my friends jokes about the cocaine curve for some players. You know, the players who party really hard when they're early on.
Yeah.
And then they crash a little bit earlier than you would expect them to. Or players like Zach Cassian who maybe never really hit their peak because they partied a little bit too hard. And then players who never really live up to their potential. You see guys who crash early. And then you see guys like Antoine Vermette who crash, but they were never really a top pairing guy.
Yeah.
But Ryan Getzlaf has been strong. He's a responsible player. To the best of our knowledge, he's never really done anything damaging to himself. And he's just been a step behind all season. Yeah. And you assume that unless he can get that back, which goalies sometimes do, players don't as often, you assume that he's lost that top-line mentality that he used to have.
Yeah.
And just watching that, especially because the salary cap could be going down, if I was a GM, I would be nervous about re-signing anybody over 30 to anything over $6 million.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's, I mean, like you said, it's Dustin Byfuglien, so it's a franchise player. So sometimes you just have to take that risk and hope that he's not going to fall by the way of Ryan Getzlaf or Danny Heatley or Antoine Vermette. You know, these guys who...
Danny Heatley, jeez.
I mean, his was injury related, but he crashed and burned in, like a year and a half's time.
Yeah, pretty much.
And then guys like who's Dave Bolland, the one who signed with the Florida Panthers. Yeah. He was never as good as his contract suggested, but he also wasn't as bad as his numbers look right now. So there are just some guys that they just crash but I'm also, I mean, I'm a conservative contract viewer. So as like you said, it's definitely not a deal that upset me. I just would have maybe preferred it to be in the $6 million range instead of the $7 million range. So
yeah, I mean, we mentioned Danny Heatley, so I'm going to use that as a really clumsy segue into the changes behind the bench in Minnesota. Obviously, Danny Heatley was a member of the Wild for a little while there, and perhaps a perfect example of perhaps one of the issues the Wild have got is they've got a lot of dollar timed up to guys who are the wrong side of 30. And you know, Mike Yow's obviously paid with his job. I wonder if this is on Yow or if this is on Chuck Fletcher, and it's a case of composition in Minnesota is just wrong. Because you know, last year Devin Dubnyk came in and pretty much saved their season. And they kind of admitted, like recently, that was a flyer on Dubnyk. It's like, he played pretty well for Arizona, we'll take a chance. Oh, hey, he did really friggin' well. But here we are again. I just, you know, I think this is a composition issue in Minnesota. How do you see the situation with the Wild at the moment?
The composition, in theory, isn't bad. I mean, Minnesota has all the pieces that you would want. Ryan Suter is on the wrong side of 30. But he's still playing remarkably well. I mean, he's Ryan Suter. His deal, I kind of wanted them to trade him last year just because they want to get rid of that cap hit as soon as they possibly can. But he's still working out very well for them. Yeah. Zach Parise is still Zach Parise. I mean, he's a player that if you have him on your team, you want him forever. They have Jared Spurgeon, who's just a dynamic little nugget of perfection. And they have guys like Granlund, who's not as defensively good as people think he is, but he's decent. They have Mikko Koivu, who's fantastic. They have guys coming up through their system. Charlie Coyle's really breaking out. Their goaltending situation really isn't that bad. They have Devin Dubnyk and Darcy Kemper. That's a perfect 1A, 1B tandem. So the makeup shouldn't be as bad. Like, it shouldn't be so disjointed.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's the coaching either. I think it was just a case where the players, whether they weren't listening to Mike Yeo because they didn't believe in what he was doing or because they were frustrated and he lost the locker room because he just couldn't find a way to get them back. I'm not sure, but I think it wasn't really his fault. It wasn't really the GM's fault. It was just things just weren't working. And sometimes you can't really put your finger on it because I think that Mike Yeo coached them. They looked like a machine.
Yeah.
The Wild were such a boring team to watch because everything they did was just right. They looked robotic out there sometimes. They didn't have these crazy, like, lose the puck at the blue line and have to dive for it. They were a well-executed team, and they just stopped winning. It doesn't make any sense because they were being coached well. They don't have the worst roster in the world. It just, I don't know.
I mean, it's
baffling.
Yeah, I mean, would you look at
by the Wild?
Yeah, I mean, would you look at Minnesota and think they're a cup-winning team, though? Could you see them winning the Stanley Cup? Could you see them getting past the Chicagos, the Blues, the Kings, those kind of teams to win the Cup? Because that's what they'd have to do to come out of the West.
The Boston Bruins, I mean, I guess the issue is that they're in the West, because when the Boston Bruins won the Stanley Cup in 2011, they didn't have a Patrick Kane or a Jonathan Toews. I mean, they had Patrice Bergeron, but they had guys like Bergeron, Lucic, Marchand, Nathan Horton, David Krejci, all great names, but not necessarily generational talents.
Yeah,
the only generational talent they really had was Zdeno Chara, who plays a different role, but I think is on par ability-wise with Ryan Suter.
Okay.
At least at this point in his career. He's old. I mean, he's old as dirt. He's legitimately old. Like, I call Dustin Byfuglien old. Zdeno Chara actually is old.
No question at all.
But he was in his mid-30s at that point. He definitely wasn't at the peak in his career. It's about whether the players can fit together. And, I mean, the scoring by committee, the defense by committee, having your forwards work with your defensemen, having your defensemen score those extra goals like Jared Spurgeon. Maybe it's not a Chicago roster, but you're not going to find more than one, maybe two of those in the NHL at any given point in time. So maybe it's just that, until Chicago manages to fall from the throne that they're on, we're not going to see many other cup-winning rosters. But I don't know. I mean, you said St. Louis, but Minnesota's beaten them in the last year in the playoffs. So it's not even that they couldn't win playoff rounds. They've been winning playoff rounds. They just, the middle of the season for them, something happens, and I can't put my finger on it. And apparently neither could Mike Yeo, because now he's unemployed.
Yeah, it's certainly a strange one. As you said, you look at the names and you'd think this was, a team that should do pretty well. But, I mean, Thomas Vanek's not had a great year, and the problem is he's 32 now. He's only got another year left. But, and Pominville might be a problem, because he's 33. He's got a $5.6 million cap hit until 2019. And his numbers just, they ain't great this year. And that's eating up some. He's got 6 goals and 21 points, which is not good for that kind of money. But
not
I don't know.
At all.
You're right. They're really hard to figure out, because when they play at their best, they look so well drilled. But there's just something that's not. Maybe this is what it was. Maybe they just needed that rocket across the bow with Chetty coming in. And I don't know. I mean, I've kind of said that a few times. I think that's what the Blues need, a change behind the bench, that Hitchcock sort of laid the table and somebody else needs to dine out. Maybe that's what happens with the Wild here. But
I've been waiting for that to happen in St. Louis for, 2 or 3 years now?
Yeah, I think a few people have.
They just, I mean, until they can get out of the first round of the playoffs, they're a team that's made up of guys that are better than they're performing. Both, I mean, they do well in the regular season, but
yeah, they just can't put it together.
They're a disaster in the playoffs. So
yeah, I kind of feel like the Blues are one, and maybe the Islanders as well with Capuano. That the table's been laid, but somebody else needs to kind of come in to dine out on it. Kind of like Bilesma did with the Penguins a few years ago. They just need that quick shifting gear behind the bench to take them over. And maybe that's what the Wild needed, and maybe that's what they'll get here. But let's move on to your own Arizona Coyotes. Currently 9th in the West, 58 points, but they do have 3 games in hand on 8th place Colorado, who have 62 points. It's been a pretty fun season to watch the Coyotes this year, I think.
Oh, it's been absolutely fantastic watching them. Last year was so hard to watch them. And I say that as someone who, they had some good players. They had some players that were so much fun to watch, but the games themselves were absolutely miserable. And this year, it's totally different. I mean, even in games that they're losing, you don't get the sense that the game is lost until the very end, except for, I mean, there have been 1 or 2 instances where there was the game against the Kings, 4 goals against in the second period. That game was done before it started. But most of their games, I mean, they come back in the second period. They come back in the third period. They fight really, really all 60 minutes, and it's making them a lot of fun to watch. So
yeah, and I think the thing that struck me is they've got a competitive roster, clearly, because they're still in the mix, but they're not anchored to a lot of guys. Shane Doan is kind of year to year, and he has been for a little while. Vermette is there for another year, but Hansel's another year, who's a pretty underrated guy, but like Boyd Gordon, a useful depth guy. He's a UFA, so they can kind of take or leave whether they keep Gordon. Kyle Chikura as well, he's a UFA. You know, they're not tied down to old guys who aren't contributing anymore. They can kind of go either way with guys like Grossman, and I like that because they've got all these young guys, and it means that they haven't got some old guy with bad knees clogging up roster spots for guys who, you know, in the very near future, guys like Dylan Strome who are going to be knocking on the door.
That's one of the most important things about the Coyotes right now is a lot of their players are RFAs or UFAs coming up this summer. I mean, Tobias Reeder's going to need a new contract. Mikhail Bodker, whether they keep him or trade him, he's going to need a new contract.
Yeah.
Connor Murphy needs a new contract. I think a couple of the others need new contracts. Louis Domingue needs a new contract, whether he signs on as their backup or they bring in someone else. They're really not tied down to a ton of guys. Really, the only guy that they're married to moving forward, other than Oliver Ekman-Larsson, who that's not an issue, is Mike Smith. I mean, that's really the only deal that you look at, and it's a problem for them. The rest of their deals are economical, they're smart, and like you said, they're not tied down to these older guys because they do have a lot of young talent that's going to be coming in soon. They have, I mean, if they bring up Christian Thomas, they just got him from Montreal. He could be decent. Christian Dvorak, one of the best players in the OHL right now, one of the best players in the OHL last year. Dylan Strome, like you said, I think he still needs another year in the OHL. That's my diagnosis. I think his skating could still use a lot of work. But he's not bad. You know, if they needed to bring him up next year, he could definitely hold his own. Yeah. Connor Garland, the one that everybody forgets about, but has 109 points in 50 games in the QMJHL this year.
Yeah.
I actually, just for fun, I took away all of his secondary assists and then let all of the other QMJHL scorers keep their secondary assists, and he is still the leading scorer by like 10 points.
Yeah.
Because he's getting goals and primary assists, and that's really all he's getting. So he's small. I interviewed him over the summer, and he's the same size as me, both height and weight. Like, he's a little dude. But if he can translate that game into the NHL correctly, he could be just absolutely lethal. Yeah. So
there's nothing to say he can't. You look at Johnny Gaudreau in Calgary. He's a small guy, and he's adapted pretty well to the NHL.
Yeah, they need to have the right mindset coming in, and that's something that Johnny Gaudreau has talked about is you need to have the right mindset that you can't be trying to lay a big hit because these guys are 7 inches and 50 pounds bigger than you are. Some of them are 100 pounds bigger than you are. So you have to play a little bit more of an evasive game, and you just have to know that, and you have to work on holding onto the puck, you know, with one hand on the stick instead of two, just because you need to fight people off. He said that that's part of how you need to develop your game if you're a smaller player. And I think that that's something that Connor Garland realizes. That's something that he's very aware of. And I think he's doing a good job of developing it. We'll see when he's going pro next year because I believe he turns 20 this spring. So he'll be AHL eligible, but we'll see how he translates it when he gets to the pro level, and hopefully he was a 5th round pick.
Yeah.
He was skipped over his first draft year entirely, and then his second draft year tied Dylan Strome in the CHL scoring race, and he still fell to the 5th round. So we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, there's two areas about the Coyotes that really intrigue me, and you've kind of touched on both of them. One is short term, one is long term. I'll go with the short term one is Michael Bodker's future, because he's developed into a pretty good player. I think it's fair to say he's got great speed. He finds the back of the net. Pierre LeBrun today saying he thinks it looks more and more likely that they will trade him. I mean, he's a big part of the Coyotes lineup right now. That's going to hurt them if they do lose Bodker.
You know, I don't think it'll hurt them as much as people think it will. If you look up the perception of Mikhail Bodker and then the reality of Mikhail Bodker are a little bit disjointed at the moment. He wants $6 million. And even if he's making $5.5 million, I don't think he's worth that. He's not worth more than maybe $4.5 million per season because he has yet to hit 20 goals in the NHL in a single season. The closest he's gotten was the 2013-14 year. He got 19 goals in 82 games. This year he has 13 and 56. He can hit that 20-goal mark, but it's not a guarantee. He'll go 15 or 16 games without scoring.
Yeah.
And his possession numbers, just for fun, I compared him to one of his most frequent line mates, which is the German Tobias Rieder.
Yeah, I saw that, yeah.
They play opposite wings from each other. One of them's 22, the other one's 25. So you assume that the 22-year-old potentially has a slightly higher ceiling if he continues to develop. And Rieder's numbers are outpacing Bodker's right now. He's outpacing him at even strength. He's better on the penalty kill. They took him off the power play to put Bodker on, but I think that's to showcase Bodker for potentially interested teams. Because, like you said, they're an economical team. They're a team that doesn't marry guys. They don't give these huge long-term contracts unless they're sure that there's someone that they need. And if Bodker's putting up, even if they're decent middle six numbers, you can't be giving him $6 million. It's not smart. And he could end up being, a 25, 30 goal scorer. And at that point, people, they can call me up and laugh at me. I'm totally fine with it. But until it's guaranteed that he's that kind of player, the team really should not be spending that kind of money, especially because within the next 3 years, Rieder's an RFA this summer. They'll need to re-sign in the next 3 years Max Domi, Anthony Duclair, Christian Dvorak, Dylan Strome. They'll need to get Connor Murphy again. I mean, they've got so many guys that will need raises.
Yeah.
And if they've given $6 million to Mikkel Bodker, that's money that they can't pay to the ones with higher ceilings.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned a few names there. Just looking down the general manager page for the coach. Michael Stone's an RFA this year. He's only 25, so he's got good years left. Connor Murphy, you mentioned, again, RFA. Tenordi, if they want to keep him on. Kevin Connaughton, who they picked up on waivers recently. Klaus Dahlback. Dahlback's been okay for them. That was a decent addition to the Vermette trade last year. So
It helps them win the Vermette trade, I think. Because, they got a first-round pick and
Vermette back
for like 20 games of Antoine Vermette. Then they re-signed him anyway. So that was a steal. But Dahlbeck, and this is just, from me watching the games, I could end up being wrong because there are other factors other than the way that a player looks to the naked eye. But I think that if they keep Tenorti to replace Grossman, I think that Connaughton has better longevity to his game than Klaus Dahlbeck. But like you said, they're both RFAs, so they can pick which one they want. Yeah. They can pick Kevin Connaughton or they can pick Klaus Dahlbeck. They have that freedom right now. So
yeah, and to be fair, from what I've seen, granted I don't watch them as regularly as you do, but I've watched a decent amount of Coyotes games this year, and neither of them have looked out of place. They both look like, you use the word useful, and it sounds disrespectful, but it's really not, because obviously you need depth, you need kind of three pairs to compete, and they don't look out of place. They're holding their own, and as you said, there's options there with. Even if they give guys 1 year extensions to give them a little bit more time to showcase what they can do, especially with Connaughton, who's not been with the team all year, they've got the flexibility is a real asset, I think, for Don Maloney moving forward. But the other area I kind of wanted to talk to you about, which is a subject close to both our hearts, is the goaltending. Because this is one area that obviously the Bodker stuff we talked about, and if they trade him, they could get a reasonable return. If they keep him, then the upsides are obvious there, and that can sort of right itself in a sense. But the goaltending is one area I'm kind of having a hard time figuring for the Coyotes, because Dominguez looked pretty good, I think, this year, and granted it's only a small sample. Lindback's done for the year with Achilles injury, so I kind of feel like Dominguez done enough to take the backup job moving forward, but there's not a whole lot of goaltending depth there. Smith's not been great for the last couple of years. I'm just struggling to get a feel of where Arizona might go between the pipes, moving forward.
And this is purely a gut feeling. I could be wrong. I think that Don Maloney is waiting to trade Mikkel Bodker until he sees at least one game of Nicholas Treutle, who's one that a lot of people don't necessarily know. Mm-hmm. He's very dear to my heart. He actually came over from the German Elite League. Yep. He played at the World Juniors in 2011 here in the United States when it was in Buffalo. He was a tandem in net with Philip Grubauer, who is obviously now the Washington Capitals backup. He played better than Grubauer did
Yeah.
at that particular tournament. He was the better statistical goaltender. And all of, I read a couple of the articles from back then. They were saying that, this kid who wasn't drafted by an NHL team is actually doing better. He was ranked, I think it was second among German-born goaltenders for his draft year, and nobody picked him up. But he's been really good in Springfield behind just an absolutely miserable defense. And it's his first year in North America. We historically see players struggle that first year over. Sometimes their save percentage drops below a 900 altogether. Yeah. And it's understandable. His hasn't. His has stayed at about a 909. He has 2 shutouts. He's doing all right. And he's only 24, maybe 25.
Yeah.
So he's an interesting name that they have in there. I do know that if he does well, he doesn't mind staying in the AHL. He said that was his goal, was to play in North America, not necessarily the NHL. If he's their AHL starter next year and Domingue is their backup, they might want to try and trade for another goaltender.
Yeah.
If they can't get another, if Trailer doesn't do well enough and they need to trade for someone much bigger, they definitely need to hold off on Bodker because they'll need to figure out how to swing a goalie in that trade. But if Trailer does well enough that he can be their starter in the AHL next year, they really don't need to be as urgent when it comes to getting another goaltender. Because like we said, they have saved a lot of money, so they can afford, moving forward, to play Mike Smith as a 1B goaltender, even though he's being overpaid for it, because they'll really only be overpaying in one position.
Yeah.
So if Treitla doesn't do very well, they might want to bring in someone else. Like if they can pick up Freddie Anderson, maybe you want to get him.
I see. He's the one dear to my heart. So
I don't think he's as good as a 1A. I think he could potentially be a 1B for a team. I would really have no issues.
Yeah, I think if he's in the right... I like Anderson because I think you get what you see. He doesn't, he doesn't have these massive highs, but he doesn't have these crushing lows either. He doesn't have these massive swings of form, and I like that. You kind of know what you're going to get with Frederik Andersen, and if you've got a guy like that in partnership with someone else who can at least be consistent, it's kind of like Brian Elliott. Elliott's highs aren't particularly high, but the Blues know what they're going to get, and they can defend accordingly to Brian Elliott, and look at the success they have as a result. I kind of see Anderson in the same sort of vein. So, sorry, I kind of went off at a tangent.
If Domingue keeps doing well enough, if the Coyotes ended up, my dream would be for the Coyotes to end up with like an Anderson-Domingue tandem.
Yeah.
That would be perfect. If they could, buy out Mike Smith, which they haven't alluded to it, because I don't want to get in trouble. They haven't necessarily alluded to it, but you get the impression from the Coyotes that if Mike Smith comes back from this injury and just cannot get himself back to where he was when he was making that much money, the team's winning enough without him that they can afford to buy him out soon. The cap hit that they're going to have from Mike Ribeiro is going down in the next year or two. So they're not going to be spending as much on him.
Ribeiro goes up, I think. Yeah.
Does it go up?
Yeah. It's 1.44 this year and next, then it goes up to 1.94 for a couple of years.
Oh, that's not bad.
So
that's not bad at all, though.
But as you said, this is the thing is that because they've got a lot of young guys, and granted, we've kind of touched on it with guys like Strome and Domi and things, but again, we come back to that cap flexibility. So, if you take that hit on the chin, it's not the end of the world. Other teams are in much worse cap situations than the Coyotes are, that's for sure.
Yeah, the Coyotes are definitely, when you look at their cap situation, it's fantastic. And it's fantastic for a rebuilding team.
Yeah.
Which this year, I didn't think that they were going to be last in the league. A lot of people really thought that they were going to be last and it wasn't even going to be close. I thought they were going to do a little bit better than that just because Reeder was fantastic last year, so I assumed he would get better. We would have a healthy Bodker, we would have a healthy Hansel, and we would have Max Domi and Anthony Duclair, which when you add all of that together, it's serviceable. It's not Stanley Cup winning material, but it's enough to at least get you to an NHL level, which last year, really the only guys who were scoring for them towards the end of last year were Tobias Reeder and Mark Arcobello. And that's not a position, and Oliver Ekman-Larsson on the blue line, but that's not a position that as a team you want to find yourself in.
No, but even kind of Don Maloney kind of admitted this week that they kind of got to a point where the Conor McDavid prize was a pretty big draw. And he was refreshingly honest, saying when that was dangling there, we kind of consciously let things slide a little bit. But
and it was, I mean, people are watching them for that, but it was smart because
yeah, absolutely.
Bodker was hurt. They had no option but to shut Bodker down. I mean, he ruptured his spleen during a game. He blocked a shot, ruptured his spleen. He was out. Hansel was dealing with a nagging injury, so they could have kept him in and had 60% of Martin Hansel for the rest of the year and been bad. Or they could have shut him down, been really bad.
Yeah.
And then maybe dealt away Antoine Vermette for a first-round pick and a defenseman. They dealt away, I think Zbigniew Michalek only played 14 games with the St. Louis Blues. It was something ridiculous like that. And they got back Maxim Latunov, who's one of the highest-scoring rookies in the NCAA this year.
Yeah.
So they got some fantastic returns for their pieces that ended up coming back to the team anyway. And that's just that just blew my mind. That made me laugh. And it was painful to watch, but it was smart management.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, as I said, it's an interesting time. I'm quite excited about the Coyotes' future. I must admit, you're slowly converting me as you've been trying.
That's my goal. That's my goal.
So, but yeah, I think it's exciting. Obviously, there's been news recently they're trying to sort out a new arena deal, which again is very positive given the wrinkles that the club's had about its future in recent years. So I think things are looking up for Arizona. But Kat, thanks very much for joining me today. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. I know you and I could probably go on and on and on about various things, but where can people find you online and so forth?
They can find me, obviously, at NGoal Mag. They can find me at Today's Slapshot, or they can just follow me on Twitter at Cata Carry On. It's CATA Carry On.
Hey, perfect. Thanks, Kat. Take care.
Absolutely. Thank you.
One.
Puck short.
And there we go. Thanks very much to Kat for joining me on today's show. Great to have her on and get some insight into the Coyotes, who are a pretty exciting team, I think, moving forward, as I said when I was chatting with her. Just a couple of notes before we go. The 2017 NHL draft is going to be held in Chicago. A few people surprised that the Toronto Maple Leafs got nothing, but of course they've got the World Cup there, which a few people have flagged as a possible reason that the NHL has been a little bit reluctant to throw too much the Maple Leafs way, because obviously they don't want fans saving their money for Winter Classics or drafts or whatever the hell else goes on when there's a World Cup to try and sell tickets for. But the hint is that Toronto will get something special to celebrate their centenary. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we go. I'd like to say thanks, first of all, to Eric Mills, who made a small donation to the show. It's greatly appreciated, Eric. Thank you very much. Everything you guys send our way goes back into the show and the blog, onepuckshort@wordpress.com, and hosting fees and all that sort of stuff. So thank you very much to Eric. If you'd like to donate to help support One Puck Short, you can do so via the blog. There's a PayPal donation button on the right hand side. Just click it. If you think worth £1, send us £1. If you think worth $10, $10, whatever you can afford, it all helps. As I said, it all goes back into the show for running costs, equipment, and so forth. There's also an Amazon affiliate link there. You basically click on that, takes you to Amazon. You shop normally. When you click on the checkout and purchase your items, it doesn't cost you anything extra, but we get a little kickback. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, you can follow me on Twitter at RobMcGregor35, or you can email us onepuckshort@gmail.com. You can also like us on Facebook, facebook.com/onepuckshort. And as I mentioned, you can always find the blog, onepuckshort.wordpress.com. And about wraps it up this week. Thanks once again to my guest, Kat Silverman, and I will speak to you all again very soon.